Dr. Alex Carter. I am Associate Professor of Philosophy and Interdisciplinary Studies at the University of Cambridge. I work mainly in professional and continuing education, which means my students are anywhere between 15 and 87. I think that's the oldest I've seen, and everything in between, of course. And I teach on a range of subjects. I teach philosophy as pure philosophy, but I also teach skills-related subjects like creativity and research skills.
If I try to think about what I think an associate professor of philosophy does on a daily basis, I would imagine someone just sitting on a rock contemplating the meaning of life. And it sounds like what you do isn't quite that. So what does a typical day look like for you?
So I don't typically think about the meaning of life unless someone puts me on the spot. And I have had that happen where someone asked me in 7 minutes to sum up the meaning of life. And a couple of questions I've had at the end of talks are things like, what happens next? And I say, what, after lunch? And they go, no, in the world, what happens next? So I think there is this expectation that philosophy engages with these grand questions, but typically philosophy is a highly technical subject. It's about understanding concepts and ideas. But for me, it's all about understanding problems. So what I typically get when I either have a research skills student coming to me or a philosophy student coming to me, they're coming to me with a problem and I make it harder. That's my job, is to make it more complicated, more difficult for them so that it taxes them, it challenges them, it pushes them to do some new thinking. That's the idea.
Are you a popular professor on campus?
Oddly, I am. And I wouldn't normally say that. I'm British, so I like to hide everything under a bushel. But no, I am. I think students generally respond very well to being pushed and being challenged on things. And I think philosophy is just such an engaging subject. People want to hear about meaning and truth and God and free will and all these sorts of big topics. And they've thought about it for a long time and they suddenly get surprised because they can think about it in quite a technical way. They can think about it in terms of the problem itself without having to try and solve it. So for instance, just a very quick example would be you have atheists and you have theists and they loggerheads and they're fighting all the time. And this is how most people understand the question about the existence of God. And then along comes Wittgenstein, my philosopher of choice, who says they're both wrong because existence is irrelevant, because God's existence it would make him trivial if God existed. So people who want God's existence shouldn't want God's existence, and people who don't want God's existence are probably going to get what they want, even from a religious believer. So it's a way of frustrating people's thinking, I think, that's how I like to sell philosophy.
Did you always know that you wanted to frustrate people's thinking? Growing up or in other words, is what you are currently spending your days doing what you always aimed towards, or how did that happen?
So I'm going to be a great champion for fortuitous events. So no, I didn't intend this to be the perfect profession for me, but it is the perfect profession for me. And I've landed on it purely by chance. My main motivation for getting into philosophy when I was younger was apathy. I was Gen X. If you don't know what Gen X is, it's The Simpsons. It's meh, I don't know, I don't care. And that's how we were raised in the 90s. We didn't really have something to be passionate or engaged about. And so questions about what do you want to do for a living, they get parked. But questions like, is there truth? Is there free will? You know, what's morality? These questions grab you. They can't help but suck you in. So my apathy level was very high, but philosophy was just a little bit higher and dragged me in. That's why I did philosophy. And I was hooked from the start. And then after finishing my PhD, I suddenly found out that I loved teaching. I didn't expect that. It was my very first class where I walked into the classroom and I thought, oh no, I've got to teach now, have I? And I taught my very first class and I thought, oh, I never want to do anything else. This is what I want to do.
How have you found that teaching philosophy helps you in thinking about philosophy or makes you a better philosopher?
That's a great point. So yes, teaching philosophy does inevitably make you a better philosopher, just communicating your ideas to someone else. I often actually give this advice to my study skills students. If you want to understand a subject, think how you would teach it. So instead of writing an essay plan, write a lesson plan. Not least because rather than focusing in on the content of the question and drilling down and down and down further and further, instead you start to think about the person who's going to be reading this, who's going to try and make sense of it. So I think teaching is vital for everyone, but in particular, it makes me a better philosopher because it keeps me honest. Otherwise, it's very easy in philosophy to just build castles in the air. And unless you actually speak to someone, you never ground them in reality. So someone can raise the most crushing, insightful question that just upends all of your thinking. That's what I'm looking for. I want someone to come and do that. There's nothing less appealing to me than a student who comes and says, "Oh, I really like your ideas. I want to agree with you." And I say, oh no. I want disagreement. I want challenge. I want the pain of the problem.
You're kind of actually changing my own definition of philosophy, and I would say I would have started the conversation thinking more about a pursuit of knowledge or a better understanding of knowledge. And from the way that you're explaining it to me now, I'm really focusing a lot more on the mechanism behind it and the methodology almost, and the process actually, and the benefit of that process rather than, as you were saying, focusing on the end goal. So is this kind of a topic that you're going to be approaching at EduFest? What can we expect to hear from you next year?
So I think philosophy is about how to think, not what to think. So always take the facts that I give you with a pinch of salt. You have to be quite critical. You have to be open to challenging ideas. People aren't entitled to their opinions. That's a falsity that we have to dispel in philosophy, because opinions matter. Opinions are beliefs that make factual claims. So if it's my opinion that today is Thursday and it's your opinion that today is Saturday, one of us must be wrong. So we have to work out, or both of us are wrong. That is possible too. So we have to try and work out what the answer is to the question. When it comes to the EduFest presentation, I'm hoping to be talking about AI. I'm going to be talking about creativity. Creativity is a very different way of thinking. So like philosophy, it's thinking in terms of problems, not necessarily always in terms of solutions, but there has to be some output from it, which is difficult for a philosopher actually, because we don't typically deliver much, unless of course you count mathematics and medicine and law and literature and all these sorts of things. Yes, okay, we've delivered that, but that was a long time ago. We haven't actually delivered much since. But so I think in terms of creativity, I think creativity is a nice place where philosophy can be applied. It can be about how do we understand human creativity in opposition to artificial intelligence, which I'm going to argue is not creative and cannot be creative in the same way that we are.
This is all everyone and anyone is talking about now, right? Should we consider AI-generated images as an artistic form versus something that a photographer has taken a photo of, or a painter has painted? Do you have anything to say to that?
There's hardly a conversation that goes by that doesn't end up talking about AI, and that's doubly true in education, where almost there's nothing else being talked about. And I hope in the coming years, we will move the dial, not so much to oppose AI. AI is here to stay. You don't get anywhere by opposing a technology. It's coming no matter what. So the question is, how do we adjust? How does education change? I remember someone said to me, opposing AI would be like opposing calculators. And I said, well, you have to remember, we did. In mathematics exams, you couldn't take a calculator in for like 10 years, but people are using AI right now. And when I say people, I mean students are using AI right now. So we have to be thinking about how we change, not just teaching, but crucially assessment. And how do we even understand education in a modern world? So AI, in terms of its impact on education, is definitely a problem we need to address, but it's also a problem that I don't think everyone's fully grappled with. There's generally just feelings. There's people who are in favor of AI and there are people who are opposed to AI. I like to think that if I'm a pessimist about AI, it's because I'm an optimist about human intelligence, and I'm an optimist about what our students can achieve.
That's a beautiful and, dare I say, even quite a romantic juxtaposition of ideas there. When you're not thinking about this beautiful juxtaposition of ideas, and when you're not frustrating people's thinking, do you take time to read, to maybe you have a series that you like to watch, music that you like to listen to, and that would get us to understand Dr. Alex Carter a little bit better?
I'm not sure this will help anyone understand me better, but I have a dog. She's called Agatha. She is named for Agatha Christie. Agatha Christie is one of my favorite writers, not because I think she's a particularly good writer. I don't think she's a great, but we don't celebrate her enough in this country. She is one of the best-selling authors of all time. And she's a woman and she's British. And there's one particular novel of hers that's never been adapted. It's actually a series of short stories, I should say, but it's called The Mysterious Mr. Quin. And not many people know it, but I think it's probably her best work. And every time I read it, I get something philosophical out of it. And I'm always taken with philosophers who will say, we can get philosophy from anywhere. There was a colleague of mine at Essex, for instance, who said we can get philosophy from the Transformers movies. They're not good movies, but you can get philosophy from them because even bad movies are presenting us with phenomena. I was talking to someone today about creativity, and they said, "Oh, that would explain so and so, the poet." And I said, "Well, technically, shouldn't it explain every poet and every artist and every musician? And if you have a theory, it should capture everything." So, anyway, I'm also currently listening to a couple of songs actually, but there's one that's sort of very prominent in my thinking. It's the most bizarre thing. I saw Richard Ashcroft pop up again, another great British artist. Richard Ashcroft popped up in the on my Apple Music app, and I thought, oh, that's interesting. What's that song? And I clicked it, and it's a remix of one of my favorite songs by a wonderful Black British musician called Joan Armatrading, who wrote one of the best pop songs ever, which is called Love and Affection. And he's written this song called Lover, which is a remix of it. And it's just the most random thing you would never expect him to do. That's creative. I like that. So I've been listening to that a lot recently.
I find that in today's day and age, a lot of the conversations that people have are about trying to persuade the other person to see things from their own perspective. And I feel like there are sadly, less and less conversations where it's about trying to actually understand the other's perspective or even just consider what the other person is trying to share with you. And so less persuasion and more just sharing of information and kind of, yes, of course, questioning some of your own beliefs and ideas, but leaving that door kind of open and maybe even leaving the discussion with, well, I still don't agree with you, but thank you for sharing your perspective. Do you find that coming from a philosophy background, that you are better able to guide people in conversation towards that kind of openness and acceptance of other people's perspectives and beliefs? Or do you still find yourself also confronted with this more pervasive kind of conversations where people are trying to persuade you to see things from their perspective and no, you're wrong, I'm right? Or do you find yourself doing that even to others, perhaps?
I'm often accused of trying to push an agenda or steamroller people into thinking a certain way. And my intention is always to present them with a case where they can justify the conclusion that I'm trying to get them to reach. So it's always by the other's own lights. And in terms of the kind of tribal discussions that we have today, where people are at loggerheads and people are disagreeing constantly, I think it's a bigger problem than we even realize there, because it's not about trying to impose a particular viewpoint on someone else necessarily. There is a lot of kind of tribal disagreement going on at the moment, where people are not so much trying to persuade anyone to a particular point of view. I don't think anyone even expects anyone to agree with them anymore. I think it's much more that they just want to own the other person or just enjoy the process of disagreement. One thing that I think is to blame for this is that people tend to assume that we can't understand another's perspective. And this is deeply problematic. If I can't understand a Black woman's experience in America, and I know what everyone is thinking as I say this, they're thinking, oh, you can't, there's no way you can, it's impossible. Then why would I read Maya Angelou? Why would I read her work? And why would anyone who does understand that perspective read her work? Because they already understand it. So the whole possibility for research, for communication, for conversation, for change assumes that we can get to know each other and that we can have empathy and understanding for each other. I think one thing that's getting in the way is technology, is this kind of, you have to express everything in terms of absolutes to get attention. It's an attention economy that we're living in now. And I think that's driving us so much of what's going on at the moment, that just give me attention, that means I win, rather than I'm even going to change people's points of view. There's so many echo chambers where people are just talking to people who already agree with them. I much prefer to be in a room with people who do not agree with me, and but could agree with me. And perhaps even I've taken people on a journey with that comment about Maya Angelou, where they've gone, oh, hang on, yeah, that's a good point. I'm not sure I could justify a position that would say there's no point me talking to people who aren't like me.
I think that these are questions worth asking. And I think that these are challenges that maybe a lot of people step away from philosophy thinking that it's too difficult or that it's too structured, or maybe they have a different perception of what it is. But I think that the way that you talk about it and you describe it, you make it so accessible and you make it so clear that actually you can engage in it on a daily basis. And working in education, perhaps I would even go as far as saying we should engage in it on a daily basis. Is there anything else that you would like to add before we say goodbye?
Yeah, so I just want to agree with what you just said. I think philosophy is very easy to start and very difficult to finish. If there is such a thing as a finish, there's a line from my favorite philosopher, which is in response to someone asking the question, does philosophy make progress? He said, if I have an itch and I scratch it, am I making progress? And I think that's what philosophy is like for lots of people. They feel the itch and they got to scratch, but they then don't know when to stop.